Welcome to the Healing Pain Podcast with Dr. Joe Tatta. Each week, we interview top experts in physical therapy, pain science, and integrative pain care. You'll learn the most up-to-date information for treating and reversing persistent pain. This podcast is for educational purposes only and not intended to be used as personalized medical advice. And now, here's your host, Dr. Joe Tatta.
Hey there, friend. Welcome to this week's episode of the Healing Pain Podcast. This week, we're discussing how mindfulness or mindful movement can shift the experience of exercise or physical activity for people. This is important because mindful movement can help people exercise in a way that is more fluid and easier. Mindful movement can help people alleviate pain. And mindful movement can help people with body image, something they oftentimes struggle with when they begin an exercise program. Some of you may know that as a kid and adolescent, and even into college, I was a gymnast. So mindful movement is something that was really comfortable for me. However, I didn't really fully dive into what mindfulness was with regard to movement until about the year 1997. In my first job at St. Vincent's Medical Center, there was a free yoga class that was offered by a yoga studio just down the block. Still there today. It's called Integral Yoga in New York City's Greenwich Village. It has wonderful yoga classes. And I became hooked. I became hooked on yoga as a form of mindful movement. And although I've never become certified in yoga, I've done thousands of hours of many different types of yoga methods and techniques. And I always recommend it for people with pain. Then somewhere around the year 2000, I worked for a practice here in New York City that specialized in sports and performing arts medicine. And part of that practice, we use the Pilates method of body conditioning for rehabilitating people with pain, as well as the performing artists and dancers that would come into our clinic. Moving with the mind or mindful movement is a big part of what Joseph Pilates created. And he actually has 5 principles of mindful movement that he includes in his method, which is called contrology. They include breathing, centering, concentration, control, as well as precision. So you see people bringing in these principles of movement into various types of movement methods and movement practices. Today, you'll meet Professor Ann Cox, whose research has been focused on understanding key determinants of physical activity-related behaviors. Ann is a professor and a researcher and has completed a 200-hour yoga teacher training and uses the knowledge of mindful movement to examine the effects of yoga on things like mindfulness, body image, and the promotion of physical activity. On today's episode, you'll learn all about mindful movement, how mindfulness shifts the experience of movement or physical activity, how yoga increases mindfulness, and how being mindful affects body image or physical activity motivation. Okay, without further ado, let's begin and let's meet Professor Ann Cox and learn how and why to add mindfulness to physical activity. Hi there, Ann. Welcome to the show this week. It's great to have you here.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
I'm excited to speak with you this week about kind of this intersection between mindfulness and physical activity that so many licensed health professionals, as well as just a layperson, are interested in. And then obviously fitness instructors who are teaching things like yoga and Pilates and Tai Chi and all these overlaps with regard to mindfulness and physical activity. You're a professor, you teach a lot of this, and you obviously research. We're going to dig into some of your research on lots of different areas in a couple moments. But tell me how you're able to blend these two together. Where did the interest come in blending the mindfulness and the physical activity together for you?
Yeah, I'll try to fast forward, tell you a little bit of my story, but in a quick fashion. I was a collegiate athlete. I played basketball, and my first love really started with wanting to understand motivation. And that's the through line that's gone from the very beginning of my interest in sports psychology all the way through to today, is this idea of motivation. So as a collegiate athlete, I struggled a lot psychologically. I just finished telling my undergrads last week, the first week of class is all about what kind of got me into the field. And the beautiful thing about struggle is it usually leads to something. And that for me led to my entire career of wanting to understand what were the factors that were influencing my motivation and really psychological well-being as an athlete in and out of the sport. So that led to getting my master's and Ph.D. in sports psychology, and firstly wanting to help other people optimize their experiences, moving their bodies and just feeling good and having optimal motivation. So I started kind of interested in the competitive sport arena, and then gradually moved to more. First, I was interested in middle school children and settings like physical education and wanting all children to have a positive movement experience in that domain. and now more recently into really all ages, a lot of interest in adolescents and female adolescents in particular, as well as adults, and wanting to promote positive physical activity experiences, mostly from a psychological standpoint, like, is it feeling good? Are you enjoying it? And an optimally motivation experience where they are experiencing the type of motivation that's going to sustain a physical activity across the lifespan. So I'm not in it for the quick fix or the short-term gains or the New Year's resolutions kinds of things. It's really the interest in mindfulness came from, I think what led me there was this pathway to what is really going to sustain this type of optimal experience long-term. There's more to it there, but I'll pause and I'm sure we'll get all the pieces will fall into place.
Last year must have been an exciting time for you because the psychology of sport really hit the airwaves. I mean, the whole zeitgeist was really about, the psychology of sport with gymnasts like Simone Biles talking about her experience, both the positive and negative experiences of how the mind has an influence on sport. And a lot of people have obviously picked it up since then. How did your kind of perspective about your work start to change once you start to see, like, hey, some of my research actually has to do with what they're talking about on the nightly news?
I think that's always been there for me because of my interest. I was always had this heightened attention and awareness that it was there. We've had sports psychologists with the Olympics for quite some time now. So I knew about it, and they truthfully started interviewing sports psychologists at the Olympics quite a long time ago. In the 90s, I think it really started to make a pretty big splash that we knew that this was a big part. It's still not getting the same attention and money as athletic training and nutrition and some of those other facets, but we know it's there. I think the Olympics was super interesting this summer, and some other high profile cases where, well, this is to me, this is more a reflection of society, more bigger question and bigger picture of choosing mental well-being over other things, which could be sports, but it also could be work and kind of this, we're done with this burnout culture. And that's really been interesting to me, and has been a result of the pandemic as well, of people reevaluating, wait a minute, how am I really feeling, whether it's in my sport life and the challenges I'm facing there, or the climate or context that I am in there, or whether it's just work. And I've been thinking about that a lot too. But it is really exciting because it feels like mental health and mental well-being, and more than that, mental thriving, is coming to the forefront. I'm really interested in that. And mindfulness is a huge piece of that, because that's step one. Mindfulness, on the one hand, one piece of it is awareness of what is actually happening. And that requires turning inwards and actually looking at, what am I feeling in this context? How am I actually feeling? We're so used to looking outside of ourselves as athletes, as workers, whatever it is, and setting those external goals and looking at those external standards for performance. And mindfulness really turns that on its head of like, okay, we have all those goals and that's your focus. How are we feeling within that context? And while we're trying to attain those goals or standards within a work or a physical activity context, that's been useful to have that skill.
100%. And mindfulness really turns it on its head, because just like other approaches to health conditions, most of the psychology-based research is based in traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, even in the sports psychology world, which mindfulness was not a part of. So if you're a runner and you're on the starting blocks and you're waiting for that gun to go off, how do you cope with the anxiety and the tension you're feeling, both internally and externally? But traditional CBT was skills and techniques to decrease that or control it or eliminate it. Where mindfulness is really something that's quite different. And even as I mentioned, even in physical activity, sports psychology, mindfulness is still not, the awareness of it is really not there yet.
Yeah, but in the sport world, it's growing quite rapidly. There are some pretty big mindfulness-based sport performance. That's not my area of expertise, because I look more at leisure time physical activity or daily physical activity. But I do know of some pretty big mindfulness-based programs that have a pretty, almost a decade or more of research on them now. I still don't know how popular that means they are in the world. I have a really skewed perception because I'm reading the literature and I'm always attuned to what's coming out on mindfulness. But you're absolutely right. That difference between cognitive behavioral therapy, which is what I grew up with, really was you're having a negative thought, stop it, eliminate it, replace it. And it's not tuning into what your actual needs might be. And it's not really accepting what's happening, which is the second part of mindfulness. So the first part I talked about is this idea of like just even being aware, which in and of itself could be a huge challenge for somebody who's not used to doing that, is this awareness of sensation and thoughts and emotions in the body. And then the second part, can you accept that? Which, as I'm now been practicing mindfulness for almost a decade in some form or another pretty seriously. And I got to tell you, that jump from attention to acceptance is a huge one. And one that I've recognized isn't just a cognitive acceptance, but it's a physical like acceptance in your body of whatever. I'm probably starting to get into your realm of pain and things like that. So it'd be interesting to talk back and forth on this, recognizing that, okay, cognitively, I'm like, allow, accept. But physiologically, I still feel a lot of muscle tension, a lot of resistance going on against whatever might be happening in my current circumstances. So that's pretty huge. And that is, you've hit the nail on the head of, that's like the key difference. It's a completely different approach.
Well, you're definitely speaking our language here. We're very interested in mindfulness and acceptance-based interventions in the pain world and even throughout physical therapy. I just released a paper with PTJ on mindfulness and acceptance-based interventions for PT practice. And in there, we talk about not just pain, but physical activity specifically, sports, non-communicable disease, looking at, as you mentioned, how do we take that awareness and acceptance piece and apply it to all the different places that we function with regard to well-being overall, right? But you have created something that is really unique, which I always share with professionals. And it's called the State Mindfulness Scale for Physical Activity. And one day I was searching for something. I was like, wait, we know that mindfulness is an important part of movement. And there are some studies, and maybe we could talk about this as well, how mindful movement may have benefits over non-mindful movement, but there was no measure out there, right? Nothing validated. And one day I came across this and I was like, well, here it is. Here's exactly what I've been looking for. So talk us about why you developed that and kind of how it works and why it's important. For example, how would a physical therapist use it?
Yeah, there's so much there. I'm trying to decide what direction to go in. The way that I talked a little bit about my athletic background, and about 9 years ago, I took a turn into the yoga world. And as I started practicing yoga, mainly for stress relief, which is really common, right? People start it for that reason, and it's wonderful. But it just started to hit me over the head how this modality of movement was qualitatively different from anything else I'd ever done. I'd done a ton of group exercise. I'd been a runner. I'd been an athlete, all of these different things. And as a researcher, I started thinking about what is the magic ingredient here? Something is different. And I landed on mindfulness. And a lot of it was from the cueing that the instructor was doing. It was the lack of mirrors in that environment in particular was really important. Sometimes the low lights and all of these factors that were turning my attention inward to notice how, the cues were just blowing me away, just getting the shoulder blade onto the back and noticing the rotation of the femur bone. And as a kinesiologist, that was all super interesting to me. Wow. And notably how that experience of turning my attention inward to sensations of really in my body, and really the alignment-based ones were really interesting to me, and how I could feel that. And that fundamentally changed my experience of my body. And I also come from a eating disorder and body image disturbance background, and that led to my research in that area. And I'm sure many, many listeners can identify with that. So just as an aside, that internal perspective on the body can profoundly shift your relationship to body image and make it more positive. By de-emphasizing the external and emphasizing the internal experience of living in your body. So as I started to research mindfulness, and I thought, also, we know that intrinsic motivation as a motivation researcher is the ideal form of motivation. And intrinsic motivation is all about enjoying the experience. And I thought, all right, well, in order to enjoy the experience of moving, don't you have to pay attention? to the experience of moving. So they started to really intertwine for me to think about how are we fueling or supporting intrinsic motivation. Yeah. And that led to, okay, what are the measures? And what's interesting in the field of mindfulness is most of the measures are trait-like. In fact, I think you find this in many fields of psychology. Many of the measures are trait-like. And that means your tendency to be mindful, like during your day, during any, average activities throughout your day. And I thought, I don't care about that so much. I think how mindful you are while you're moving is really interesting and really might matter for understanding your physical activity habits later that week or years down the road, potentially. How mindful you tend to be while you're in those bouts of moving your body or exercising your body. So we specifically took a state mindfulness scale that did exist, one of the, maybe 3 of them that are out there that did exist, and we modified it to be just a little bit more suitable for movement. So there was just some minor wording changes. It actually wasn't that much of a revision, but we changed some of the words to be more suitable to a movement context. So the idea is that it could be applied to physical therapy, exercise, sport. We haven't tested it in physical therapy specifically, so that would be interesting to hear more about, but we've tested it with people competing in sport and doing yoga and doing many, many, many different kinds of exercise. And it seems to work in all of those contexts. And the items on the scale specifically refer to how aware you are of the various sensations in your body. And we call that mindfulness of the body. That's the one I'm the most interested in within the context of physical activity. But then there's a second subscale, which refers to this awareness and attention to the thoughts and emotions, which are also a huge target of mindfulness. So that's a separate subscale. It's a good place to pause, but I do want to mention, and you'll be interested in this, that we notably left out acceptance in this scale. It's all about attention and awareness. And so we have a paper that just came out this year on the new acceptance items. So I don't know if you saw that, so you might want to be looking for that. Because honestly, in doing more and more research over the last 9 years on mindfulness, attention without acceptance, you're just not all the way there. And so we really wanted to start to be able to assess this acceptance of what is coming up for you in your physical sensations or in your thoughts and emotions while you're moving.
Is that a separate measure, or you just added questions to the mindful scale for physical activity?
I mean, I think ideally you would use them together, but it depends on your purpose. You could use them separately. We now have 4 subscales.
In one self-report measure.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
That's right.
How many questions total is that now? Because professionals always want to know, well, I want to use this, but how many questions is this? If it's really long, I'm not going to use it.
Yeah. I can't remember off the top of my head because we went through a few different versions of trying to go, well, could we make this even shorter? So we'll just have to maybe link to that article where it has all the information. So the original scale had 2 subscales of 6 items each. So it's 12 items. Yeah, we hate to go to like 24 items, starts to become a pretty long scale. So we experimented with some shorter versions as well. And hopefully we can continue to adapt it so that it's something that's really practical as well.
Yeah, and I looked at it. I think it's somewhere between 13 and 15 somewhere, which is completely doable for any practice, which is important. Right. So you have the awareness side and you have the acceptance side, which are the 2 pieces of mindfulness that you're looking specifically in the context of movement, which I love. What I love about this research is that it takes the psychology kind of out of the chair and now starts to look at, okay, what happens with mindfulness in motion, in essence? Mm-hmm. And how does that impact, obviously, your acceptance and your awareness? What have you found with applying the scale to different populations?
Well, I think one of the things that you just said made me think about how mindfulness in motion, I think about mindfulness in motion as opposed to mindfulness sitting on your meditation cushion or lying down doing a body scan, which are all wonderful ways to practice mindfulness. But it took me a while to sit on a cushion. The mindfulness during yoga, I found to be such an interesting target of attention. And so I really do promote that as a way of, if you're wanting to get into more mindfulness or more meditation, that doing it while you're moving is a great way to do it. And that's still doing it. And it's up to you how much attention and focus you bring and acceptance you bring to those sensations while you're moving. But what a fascinating way to do it. So I always say that was kind of that was my entry into eventually doing some seated meditation, which I do almost every day as well in some form or another. But the moving is so interesting. It changes and there's all these things to play with. So one of the things we've looked at is, well, let's like test this theory of, do you have to be more mindful to be more intrinsically motivated, or could being more mindful actually help people be more intrinsically motivated? So what we know is that the average adult is not intrinsically motivated to move. They're just not. And even those who move semi-regularly are not necessarily intrinsically motivated. But what we also know is that that's the form of motivation that's required to have a really consistent practice across your lifespan. So the people who really almost never miss a full week, right? They're kind of in, maybe they have more or less active weeks, but they're in it. You know, every week it's part of their life, probably have intrinsic motivation to some degree. And so we've done experiments like taking, one of our last studies was taking women who were relatively inactive, like not quite meeting the national guidelines for physical activity. And so we can infer from that maybe that they don't have a super high level of enjoyment of physical activity. And we have them walk on a treadmill and do so while they are listening to music, which we know can make physical activity more enjoyable and actually increase your effort levels and things like that. Or while they're not doing anything, perhaps not listening to anything, or while they're listening to a track that induces mindfulness or encourages them to be mindful, specifically of the physical sensations, although we note some of the other things as well, but more mindful of the physical experience of walking, just walking on a treadmill. There's a lot behind this. I'll take a little bit of an aside to say one of the reasons we want to look at this is that people bring a lot of baggage into their exercise, and I imagine into their PT. Baggage, history, expectations, assumptions, past experiences. They're bringing all of that at, say, 45, 50 years old into this physical activity experience. And some of that might be rooted in traumatic PE experiences in sixth grade. Some of that might have been a bad sport experience or some, other kind of physical activity experience where they felt less than, or it was really painful, or it was really, really not enjoyable in some form. All of that psychological stuff comes with them. And what that can do if you're not mindful is it can mask what's actually happening in the moment. So one of the things I've been thinking about is if we can actually support people to pay attention to what's really happening now, might we be able to kind of override that programming and create new programs? Because what we also know is that low to moderate intensity exercise for most people, depending on your ability and disability and those kinds of things and pain levels, is enjoyable. For the average healthy person, it's enjoyable, like full stop. It's enjoyable. Everybody will report that low to moderate physical activity is enjoyable. So then why aren't we doing it? I mean, there is a big bar to starting, right? It's getting over the hump. But what if we actually had people pay attention to what it really feels like to walk on a treadmill and get your heart rate up a little bit, get your muscles a little bit warm?
Yeah.
And what we found was that it was as enjoyable to walk on a treadmill listening to music as being mindful. So that was huge because we already know that music is really enjoyable. So to even be at the same level, we also found, I was just reviewing these results the other day, actually. So we also found, and I had forgotten this, that the effort level was the same and higher than in the control condition where they weren't listening to anything. And that was surprising to me because the mindfulness you could see it as taking you down a notch. Oh, I'm really paying attention. Maybe I'm going a little more slowly. And the music could take you up a notch. But the effort was the same. And in that particular study, another strength of it, I thought, was asking them to do self-paced exercise. So kind of taking that out of the equation where you can do whatever you choose, whatever you want to do, that's the effort level you can do. And the literature as a whole shows that when you ask individuals to do self-paced or self-selected intensity exercise, they choose a level that is health enhancing. They don't go below a level of exercise that is going to give them the health benefits of exercise. So it's a good thing. We don't have to give these really strict prescriptions of exercise necessarily. People will self-select into a level of intensity that does give health benefits. And it's the same level that tends to be enjoyable for many, many people. That's one of the things we've looked at, and it's really, really promising that when we get people to pay attention, exercise feels good, and you tend to choose exercise at a level that's going to give health benefits.
That's great. Two things come to mind there as you're talking. The first is, if people can self-select the appropriate level that provides them with a health benefit, I think it takes a lot of pressure off of finding the best exercise, the right intensity, the right place, the right time, where people can have the intrinsic motivation, you're saying, to figure that out on their own in some way.
I think that's daunting, and that's exactly where I want to go. So I was hoping to be able to talk about this just a little bit, is especially it's January, and I mentioned the New Year's resolutions, and there's always the newest, latest, hottest exercise trend. And when I look at those, and I used, in my 20s and 30s, I was all about looking at what those were too. And it's exciting and it's new. But by and large, what I'm noting about those exercise programs is that they are at an intensity level that is too high. Mm-hmm. They tend to look pretty extreme. And when I've tried them, they're pretty high intensity. And my concern is that the fitness industry, or the messaging that the average person gets, which is hard for me to discern because I'm not the average person, right? So I see everything through these filters. But my concern is that the average person thinks that in order to have the health enhancing benefits, they have to be exercising at a pretty high level. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessary. It's not true. It's going to depend on you as an individual. So we have to individualize this stuff. And it's really, really likely to lead to you dropping out pretty quickly, because it's going to be unpleasant, uncomfortable, and induce soreness that is really painful and uncomfortable, and all of those kinds of things. So I'm trying to figure out how to have a relationship with exercise prescription. And I'm not sure what that looks like yet, but I'm concerned for a couple of reasons. And one is what I've just said about the mismatch between maybe what the individual needs or what they're going to enjoy, and these particular exercise programs. And the other is that, without probably meaning to, when you have a really strict exercise program, and by strict, I just mean that you have one, that it's telling you that you're doing this on Monday and this on Tuesday. This is your exercise program. This is the number of sets, the number of reps, the number of minutes, perhaps the intensity level. It is taking away all of your autonomy. And intrinsic motivation, from a theoretical perspective, is fueled primarily by a couple of things. And maybe mindfulness is another one, but we don't really have a theory that talks about that so much yet. Perceptions of competence, which means, do you feel like you can do it? And perceptions of autonomy, which means, can you feel free to choose it? And maybe you think, well, I did freely choose this program. That's a piece. But then you get into it and you're no longer freely choosing. The program is telling you what to do every single day. And so I've really, in my own world, I've been experimenting with this a ton and trying to think about how to translate this to the public, is to teach the skills at which you could get on for that bike ride. And I use the Peloton app. I love the Peloton app. It's really fun. I get to choose what kind of ride I want to do. But what if I get into that ride and they say increase the intensity and I'm feeling kind of depleted? I actually need to back it off. Can I learn the skills where I know how to listen to my body well enough that I can tell what I need today, and I feel empowered and continue to fuel my intrinsic motivation, because I'm able to make the decisions in the moment that feel good. And then that means I'm going to get on the bike again later that week. So that's really where my passion lies right now, is figuring out how we're going to bridge that. Take your exercise program and your ideas and your structure, because structure is a piece of it. We need to know how to exercise. The average adult needs to know how to exercise, but how can we empower that person to also make decisions that meet their psychological and physical needs moment by moment?
Mm-hmm. Not creating an exercise prescription that reinforces avoidance of the activity.
Yeah.
Is a big challenge for people.
Yeah.
Especially people with chronic pain, because as you mentioned, if you're looking for an exercise program, they're quite long, quite intense, and they're not achievable.
Yeah.
Unless you're creating something that's achievable for someone, whether someone with pain or without pain, that's extremely challenging. The other place your research starts to go down is looking at body awareness and the impact of, I guess, mindfulness and yoga on body awareness. Can you talk to us about where mindfulness comes in with body awareness? There's a whole positive body image trend out there, that I think is really important, because there are lots of different types of bodies that want to move and love movement, and we should reinforce that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. What you said before, I kind of want to continue on this thread, but it goes into this new thread as well, is I think with body awareness and the acceptance. So what I'm interested in helping people learn, right, is becoming aware, number one, of what is your body, what are you experiencing in your body while you're moving? What is that feeling like? It could be exertion, it could be pain, and noticing and accepting. And then there's that line, right, where we're teaching, and maybe you're working with clients or patients who are trying to learn what that line is, which means I need to slow down or I need to back it off. So that could be a whole thing where you're learning that together with somebody you're working with. And you might need that outside instruction to help you start to learn that if you're dealing with chronic illness. Do you want to jump in?
So we call that the edge.
Oh, okay.
And there's two parts of the edge. If you think of so this is like a sport analogy or metaphor. If you think of a figure skater, they glide along their edge. If you're on the soft part of the edge, that's where you want to be. It's enjoyable. But if you move into that hard part of the edge, that's where the line of gravity goes off and boom, you're down. Very common also in snowboarding. But teaching people that awareness and acceptance of, okay, here's the edge. Now that edge has two sides to it, a sharp side and a soft side to it. How do you play? How do you become curious and play with those two aspects? Because that's what athletes do all the time, especially in certain sports, more of the aesthetic type sports. They're continually playing with edges that challenge their physicality, challenge their emotional status, challenge their, the capability of what they can do as a human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so you're learning how to identify that edge. You're learning to trust yourself and to trust that you're learning how to make decisions that best meet your individual needs. Mm-hmm. And quite honestly, I think the challenge in our society is that many, many people are actually not interested in that. Mm-hmm. They're still interested in the fitness world, I feel like the interest is still in looking a particular way, right? So fitness is completely conflated with body image. I should exercise to lose weight, change my shape, increase my visible muscle mass. I'm not even going to say muscle mass, my visible muscle mass, right? It's completely conflated. And so I think it's scary. I'm thinking about the average exerciser now who has those goals in mind, or at the very minimum, they're swimming in the back of their head because they live in this society that this program told me that I can meet these goals if I do this program. So it's scarier to listen to my body and allow myself to slow down or do something different. That's a process. That's a long process. And when it comes to body image, likewise, it's pretty big leap to go from, well, but I'm really good with monitoring my external appearance. And as long as I'm doing this strength training and this aerobic and watching, these kinds of foods that I'm eating every week, as long as I'm doing those things and I continue to monitor my external appearance, things seem okay. I'm comfortable with where I am. And shifting from that to, I'm going to trust to listen to what my body needs and what kinds of foods it needs to eat and what kinds of movement it needs to have. Because at the end of the day, what really matters is that I feel healthy and vibrant and thriving, rather than I look a particular way, which many times does not equate to vibrant and thriving and healthy.
So might the question be, and do we have any evidence to this, that to optimize physical performance, whether you're an athlete or whether you're someone who wants to maintain their health, which obviously has positive physical and mental health benefits to it, might it be that those who have enhanced mental health or enhanced performance would benefit from that mindful awareness and acceptance perspective instead of the more hardcore, you need to go to the gym every day, you need to do the treadmill for 30 minutes, you need to lift X amount of weight, you need to increase strength, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, theoretically, yeah. I have a hard time, the world of the competitive athlete, feels in some ways a bit different from the world that I'm kind of residing in now, which is really just helping the average person feel good moving in their body so that they continue hearing those cues that their body wants to move and how it wants to move. And dispelling these myths that moving your body needs to look like these high intensity exercise programs.
So let me reframe my question then.
Yeah,
So
sure.
the person I often see at the gym on the treadmill, that's walking on the treadmill for like 90 minutes, and they're reading a magazine. And my perception, this is my judgment, I don't know if this is true or false, but my perception is they're probably not embodying the experience of exercise, right? 60 plus minutes on a treadmill, reading a magazine, they're probably not embodying the experience of movement and exercise. Might it be that that person would achieve their fitness goals and enjoy it more if they put the magazine down and learned how to apply mindfulness to their movement?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I did an interview with the founder of Curvy Yoga one time and titled it, if I listen to my body, will I ever get off the couch? The answer was yes. I think the part that people are scared of is that. Mm-hmm. But if I listen to my body, I won't get off the couch. I won't ever eat a salad. And I found that to just be untrue. And granted, I'm coming from a background of having moved my entire life, but I've had some pretty low points too, where I wasn't moving at all and was eating far from what was healthy and those kinds of things. So I've had some of those experiences. And what I believe fundamentally is that we are meant to move. Evolutionarily, we're made to move, and that it might take you a little while, but that if you do start listening in, you might be even surprised at how much your body wants to move and how that builds over time. But guess what? It's not linear. It's not this thing. We want progress, right? Like, oh, it's got to be that I'm always doing a higher intensity or a higher weight that I'm lifting and it's going up, 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 up. Or I do a lot of yoga and that it has to be, more and more and more challenging yoga practices. I don't think that's what it looks like. It looks like an up and down. And at some points in your life, you're into the more higher intensity. At some points in your week, you need a lower intensity. You need a more relaxed movement practice in your body. And that's what my weeks look like, quite frankly. And I don't prescribe. I have kind of in my life, I have a bucket of ways that I like to move my body. And I kind of have these written down in my daily planner. And then I allow the day to tell me which one I need that day. And it's everything from a more relaxed yoga to a more intense yoga, a more relaxed bike ride to a high intensity interval training bike ride, a stretching practice. And then I have my relaxation practices, which would be more of a body scan or a listening to a sound meditation as well, which aren't movement, but they're really important ways of being in my body. For me, those lines are getting blurrier and blurrier, the moving to the not moving, but they're all being in your body. I think that person on the treadmill, one thing I will say is, I think they're going to feel better if they start tapping into what their body actually feels like and making decisions that go with that. You're going to feel better. And in my mind, when I talk to people about this, I tend to think that you're going to reach whatever individual potential you're meant to reach by following that awareness and acceptance of internal sensation, as opposed to some kind of external goal or guide. That theoretically, if you keep listening to that, our bodies want to move and our bodies want to feel competent. And guess what it requires to feel competent? Challenge and novelty. So our bodies are actually going to seek that out if we give them the opportunity to seek that out. And your body's not going to want this extreme challenge and novelty every single day.
So as you start to move, you will start to feel good. But first, and this is in realm to the body awareness part, first you have to feel good. And that leads really into the topic of interoception, which is really when you're talking about body awareness, feeling, being mindful. That interoceptive piece is often missing from so many different approaches in healthcare. Obviously, we're not just talking about interoception of your musculoskeletal system, but every other organ in your body or a lot of other organs in your body are doing things as you exercise. Some of them are heightened and some of them are more inhibited, but that's all part of that experience of that body awareness or you mentioned body surveillance. Can you tell us what body surveillance means in your literature?
That is typically how we are viewing our body. If you are in a typical Westernized society that places a great emphasis on external appearance, you're probably engaging in a good deal of body surveillance, which is my attention and concern about how my external appearance looks to people outside of me. So how am I presenting to the world? And girls and women in particular engage in higher levels of body surveillance than men, but boys and men do as well. And the more that you do, the more negative your body image is and the worse you tend to feel about your body. So one of the cool things about whether you're convinced you should let go of those weight loss goals or not, which I would love everybody to throw their scale away right now, but whether or not you think you should do that, the more that you pay attention to how you feel on the inside, your body surveillance naturally declines. So it just kind of I think it just naturally starts to fade away. And the more that fades away, the better you feel about not only the internal, but also the external. It's like this awesome side benefit. So you don't actually have to change the outside of your body to start feeling better about it, which is such a cool thing.
It really is. I love that. You've got so many good messages in here, Ann, with regard to movement and mindfulness, and just speaks to, I was a gymnast from a young age, and I think I learned a lot of this just as happenstance, really. And then I wound up in a profession that teaches it, and then I wound up researching these things. So it's such a nice confluence of so many different topics. I appreciate it. If people want to learn more about you and your work, where can they find you, and where can they find that mindful scale for physical activity if they want to start using it?
Yeah, that is on our lab website. So in the show notes, I believe you'll have the link to our lab website. My colleague, Sarah Ulrich French, is the co-director of the lab, and we work together really closely on all of this mindfulness research. So check out the lab website. We have the measure there, as well as references for the measure and all of that information. So you can find that there. You can search for me on the Washington State University website. You'll find my other faculty profile page there as well. Those are the big ones. I'm really practicing a lot of mindfulness in my life right now. So I'm not on social media very much. I'm always trying to navigate like what I want my relationship with social media to be. I think I gave you maybe my Instagram, but I'm not really on social media right now. That might change. And the last thing I'll say that this has been making me think about, I'm just embarking on wanting to write a popular book about all of this and which will be, as you probably know, like probably a 3-year journey. So don't go out and be looking for that anytime soon. But I really do want to find a way to bring this all together and deliver it to the masses. And I keep thinking that this is so much like the intuitive eating world. So if anybody's familiar with the world of intuitive eating, I think what they did for eating, we need to do for physical activity.
Well said. And I'll challenge you on that 2-year or 3-year journey. You can write a book in 12 to 18 months. I've done it. And you got lots of great research to help support you. Of course, you can find all the information Ann just mentioned on the show notes at the Integrative Pain Science Institute, and you can reach out to her on the university website at Washington State University. You can just go to wsu.edu and probably type in Ann Cox, and you'll find the lab and all of the resources that we mentioned today. If you know anyone, professionals or people who are interested in physical activity and the intersection of mindfulness, make sure you share this episode with them on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or where anyone is talking about mindfulness and physical activity. I want to thank Ann again for joining us this week. I'm Dr. Joe Tatta, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Healing Pain Podcast with Dr. Joe Tatta. To subscribe to the podcast and learn more, visit integrativepainscienceinstitute.com. That's Integrative Pain Science Institute.com. Sign up to receive weekly updates, leave a review on iTunes, and share this episode with your friends.